Hi, my name is Moises, and this is my video contribution to the Public Forum debate assignment in my Com22 class. Now, if you're a human being, you've probably made mistakes. Whether they were big or small, you made them, and you probably learned from them. Well, how would you feel if, as a punishment, you were affected for the rest of your life permanently, and that your basic rights as a person and as a citizen were taken away from you? Well, this is essentially what we do to prisoners whenever we convict them of certain offenses. And I believe that prisoners should have just as much of a right to vote as every other person who is a non offending citizen. I think it's important that we acknowledge that prisoners are just as deserving of baseline civil rights as the rest of us, and that, just like prisoners, we are all vulnerable to the circumstances of imprisonment, as well as the institutions that are inherently flawed with managing the power of justice responsibly. First, I'll assess the scope of why prisoners not being allowed to vote is bad. Then I'll contribute a policy that adequately addresses the fallacies of felon disenfranchisement. And then I will explain why the plan will work in the favor of the overall well being of society in the long run. So, to start off, let's discuss a little history. So, the constitutional basis for felon disenfranchisement laws goes all the way back to the 14th Amendment, which states that you can't have your basic voting rights taken away from you unless, as stated in Section 2 of that same amendment, you participate in an act of rebellion or if you've committed some other crime. Now, this was during the era of the Civil War and Jim Crow, where policymakers were very racially motivated in drafting their decisions. And so, as you can imagine, they took advantage of that sort of amendment to try to continue their suppression of African American people at the time. Now, when the 15th Amendment passed, which gave black men the right to vote, the percentage of disenfranchisement laws that were enforced skyrocketed drastically from 33% in 1850, which was pre the 15th Amendment, to 75% in 1870, which was post the 15th Amendment. And this established the precedent for America's unique penchant of just not just excessive mass incarceration, but also the disproportionate rates at which non-offenders or non-white offenders are imprisoned compared to white offenders, with 1 in 13 black people in America currently lacking the right to vote. Not only does America's obsession with disenfranchisement continue a crusade of minority dehumanization and racial injustice, but it also takes a toll on the way we implement just democracy as a whole. Like, for example, the 2004 election, where 5.3 million people, which is 2.7% of the voting eligible public, were not allowed to cast a ballot because they, were convicted of certain offenses, and thus they could not participate in the democracy of the election. And that, 5.3 million people, that's like the equivalent to like the entirety of Cuba's population or Sweden's population. So you have all those people who are sort of not allowed to participate in democracy and express their voice because of meager felon disenfranchisement laws. And if you think it's fair that those people had their rights taken away from them as a result of committing crimes and offenses, just consider that in Florida, if you have even one single conviction, then your voting rights are taken away from you permanently with no leeway for trying to get them back or for trying to petition to sort of regain them. Like, you would have to be pardoned by the governor, and that's basically impossible in Florida. So, like, essentially, if you steal something, that you're punished just the same as if you murdered somebody, and that's just a blanket consequence that proves that the justice system isn't really about equity, but it's about making sure that no one person can ever feel like they have too much power in their capacity for dissent and for challenging the rule of the elite. So, what would need to be done to retain our democracy? I think that we should adopt a legal system that allows all inmates to retain their rights to vote, regardless of their status at that moment. So, whether they're imprisoned or on probation or parole, they should keep their rights to vote no matter what. And of course, if your objection to this is that, oh, it allows like really serious offenders to have a say in how we run society through our politics and our legal system, we can add a caveat to that legal system where people who commit certain offenses that are considered very serious can be brought before a judge, and the judge can use their discretion to decide if if that person deserves to have their voting rights taken away or not. And even then, the voting rights, they'll be temporary, so they're not permanently affected, but it is sort of a consequence that is effective for a certain period of time while we figure out what to do with said person. So we can make the effort to rehabilitate them or integrate them back into society while they're currently not while they're not allowed to vote at that moment. So why is this model really worth implementing in the first place? Well, I think that disenfranchising, criminal offenders like really does not really work in the long run because I mean, when we rob prisoners of their basic rights to vote, we're essentially alienating them and isolating them and fostering that sense in the individual. And there's really that there's really no benefit to that in the overall well-being of society to have people who just sort of feel alienated by systems of power that work to actively dehumanize them. And so you have higher rates of recidivism, and you just sort of perpetuate the system of crime by constantly forcing circumstances on the people who feel pressured or like they have no voice or agency. It's very existentially troubling for them, and as a result, it doesn't like we're not punishing people to make them better. We're punishing them just to continue, a complex of industry such as prisons that work to dehumanize the people that they're under. So let's try to change the way we look at prisoners in an attempt to enhance our perspective, because the concept of disenfranchisement is a method rooted in racial discrimination and it hampers the reach of our democracy. So we have to preserve the basic human right of voting for all citizens so that no one is plagued by a disconnect between their status quo as a functioning member of society and a human soul. We got to challenge the status quo of the legal system and mobilize against the rules of the state to ensure that actual change is feasible and tangible. Don't let the broken standards of flimsy institutions obstruct the manner in which you reckon with your own flaws. Consequences can be deserving, but they cannot come at the expense of your own personhood. Thank you.